fired for offering a free meal. Then her phone rang. "The owner you served is outside." The metallic clang of the dumpster lid slamming shut echoed Emily's own hollow feeling. 1 minute she was a waitress, the next an unacceptable liability, all for a lukewarm cup of coffee and a day-old bagel she'd given to a man who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Now the greasy apron was balled up in her trembling hands, a pathetic flag of surrender. The city air, usually a comforting mix of exhaust fumes and distant bakery scents, felt suffocating. Rent was due. Her cat Mittens was probably already wondering about dinner. Just as a particularly bleak vision of eviction notices danced in her head, her cheap smartphone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Probably another scam call promising a free cruise she couldn't afford, even if it were real. But something made her answer. "Hello?" Her voice was scratchy. "Emily Carter?" a low, calm voice inquired. It was smooth-cultured, utterly out of place in her current reality of discarded dreams and stale donut smells. "Yes, this is Arthur Harrison, the gentleman you served coffee to this morning at Millie's diner." Emily's stomach plummeted further. Oh, God, he was going to complain. Maybe he'd gotten sick from the bagel. This day just kept getting better. "Look, I'm really sorry if I'm outside your apartment building, Ms. Carter," the voice interrupted, still unnervingly calm. "I believe we have something rather important to discuss concerning your recent termination." Emily froze, her blood turning to ice water despite the humid afternoon. She peeked through her blinds. A sleek, black sedan, the kind that whispered of serious money, was parked at the curb. A man in a tailored suit leaned against it, phone to his ear, looking directly at her window. It was him, the man from the diner. But he looked different. Clean-shaven, his worn clothes replaced by an expensive suit that probably cost more than her last 3 months' rent. The desperate, haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by an expression of thoughtful scrutiny. What in the world was going in Emily Carter's world until that fateful Tuesday was a predictable landscape of early mornings, the scent of brewing coffee, and the worn linoleum floors of Millie's diner. At 26, she navigated her life in Dayton, Ohio, with a quiet resilience. Her tiny studio apartment filled with second-hand furniture and an impressive collection of library books was her sanctuary. Her days were a blur of taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and offering a sympathetic ear to the regulars at Millie's, a classic American diner that had seen better days but still clung to its charm, much like its clientele. There was Mrs. Henderson, a widow, who always ordered a single pancake and black coffee, lingering for hours over a crossword puzzle. There were the construction guys from the site down the street, loud and jovial, always tipping generously if their bacon was extra crispy. And there was Leo, the retired history teacher who'd debate current events with anyone willing to listen, his voice raspy from years of lecturing. Emily knew their orders by heart, their little quirks, the stories of their grandchildren. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a small, consistent part of their lives. Her own life was less picturesque. Her mother was in a nursing home 2 states away, the bills, a constant, gnawing worry. Emily harbored a distant dream of going back to community college, maybe studying social work, but the daily grind of bills and responsibilities kept that dream firmly on the back burner. Her manager at Millie's, a perpetually stressed woman named Sharon, ran a tight ship. "Margins are thin. Emily," she'd say, her eyes scanning for any wasted sugar packet or lingering customer not actively ordering. No freebies, no lingering, unless they're paying. We're a business, not a charity. Emily understood she really did, but sometimes her empathy overrode Sharon's directives. A little extra syrup for Mrs. Henderson, a blind eye to Leo, nursing his coffee for an extra hour. Small kindnesses that made her shifts bearable, even if they earned her the occasional tight-lipped glance from Sharon. The diner itself was under a vague, unspoken pressure. Rumors circulated about a new corporate owner, some faceless entity based out of Chicago or New York, that had bought up a string of independent diners across the Midwest. Whispers of standardization and efficiency reviews made everyone uneasy. Sharon was more on edge than usual, her pronouncements about waste and loitering becoming sharper, more frequent. Emily tried to fly under the radar, doing her job efficiently, offering her quiet smiles and hoping for the best. She was good at her job, meticulous with orders quick on her feet, and possessed a seemingly endless well of patience. Her flaw, if it could be called that in a world that often seemed to devalue it, was her compassion. She couldn't quite switch off the part of her that saw beyond the transaction, that recognized the flicker of loneliness in Mrs. Henderson's eyes or the genuine need in a stranger's hesitant request. This subtle tension between the demands of the business and the pull of her own nature was the backdrop to her ordinary world, a world that was about to be irrevocably disrupted. She knew deep down that her tendency to bend the rules for a human reason might one day cause a problem. She just hadn't expected it to cost her everything. Tuesday had started like any other. The pre-dawn chill still clung to the air as Emily unlocked the door to Millie's, the familiar smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner greeting her. The early regulars shuffled in, grumbling good-naturedly about the weather or the news. Emily moved through her routine with practiced ease. Coffee brewing, grill sizzling orders scribbled on her notepad. Around 9:00 a.m., the bell above the door jingled, and an older man shuffled in. He was thin, his clothes rumpled, and a size too big, his gray hair unkempt. He carried a palpable air of weariness and confusion, his eyes darting around the diner as if he wasn't sure where he was. He settled into a booth in the corner, fumbling in his pockets for several long moments before pulling out a few crumpled dollar bills and some loose change, which he spread on the table with a sigh. Emily approached him with a gentle smile. "Morning, sir. Coffee?" He looked up, his gaze unfocused. "Oh, yes, please. And, what's cheap?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost ashamed. Emily's heart went out to him. She'd seen that look before. "How about a hot coffee and a nice plain bagel?" "On the house this morning," she said softly, making it sound like a special promotion. "We've got a few extras." A flicker of relief, then suspicion crossed his face. "You sure absolutely," Emily said, already turning to get it. She knew Sharon was in the back doing inventory and wouldn't see. She'd just pay for it out of her tips later if she had to. She brought him the coffee and a toasted bagel with a small pat of butter, noticing how his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the warm mug. He murmured a thank you and began to eat slowly, with a quiet dignity. An hour later, as Emily was clearing a nearby table, Sharon emerged from the back, her eyes like a hawk's. She spotted the man, then her gaze flickered to his nearly empty plate and cup, then sharply to Emily. "Did he pay for that?" Sharon hissed, sidling up to Emily. He was a bit short. I was going to cover it." Emily stammered, caught off guard. Sharon's face tightened. What did I tell you about freebies? Emily, this isn't a soup kitchen. That's theft. Company policy is clear. He looked like he really needed it, Sharon. It was just a bagel and coffee. It's the principal. Sharon cut her off, her voice rising slightly, drawing glances from a few customers. This is your final warning. One more stunt like this, and you're out. Emily felt a flush of anger and shame. It was a small act of kindness. She said, her own voice firmer than she intended. Is there no room for that? Sharon's eyes narrowed. Your job is to take orders and collect money, not to make judgment calls on who deserves charity. If you can't understand that, maybe you're not cut out for this. In fact, Sharon's expression hardened, a sudden decision solidifying in her eyes. You know what? I'm tired of this. You're fired, Emily. Get your things and go. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. Fired for a bagel. Disbelief warred with a rising sense of injustice. For insubordination and theft of company property, Sharon stated coldly, turning on her heel. Leave your apron on the counter. Stunned, Emily moved as if in a dream. She mechanically untied her apron, her mind reeling. A few regulars looked on with sympathy, but no one spoke up. Mrs. Henderson gave her a small, sad wave. Emily managed a weak smile, grabbed her worn backpack from the staff room, and walked out of Millie's diner, the place that had been the predictable, if sometimes frustrating, center of her life for 3 years. The injustice of it burned. Her immediate goal was simply to get home, to let the shock wear off, and then somehow to start the desperate search for another job. It was only when she was halfway home, replaying Sharon's harsh words, that her phone rang with the unknown number, delivering the second, even bigger shock of the day. Emily Carter, this is Arthur Harrison. I'm outside your apartment building, the man from the diner, the owner. What could this possibly mean? Fear, confusion, and a tiny irrational spark of hope churned within her as she approached her building, her steps hesitant. Emily descended the creaky stairs of her apartment building, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The man, Arthur Harrison apparently, was waiting by the black sedan, no longer leaning, but standing straight, his posture exuding an understated authority. As she approached, he offered a polite, almost formal nod. Ms. Carter, thank you for coming down. His voice, without the distortion of the phone, was even richer, carrying a natural gravitas. Mr. Harrison, Emily managed, clutching her backpack strap like a lifeline. I don't understand. Why are you here if this is about the coffee? A faint smile touched his lips. The coffee was excellent, as was the bagel. And your kindness, Ms. Carter, was even more remarkable. Emily blinked, thrown. My kindness. That's what got me fired. Precisely, Harrison said, his expression turning serious. And that's why I'm here. May we perhaps sit somewhere and talk my car if you're comfortable, or there's a small park around the corner. Still wary but intensely curious, Emily opted for the park bench. It felt less enclosed, less like she was being cornered. As they sat, the late afternoon sun dappling through the leaves, Harrison began to explain. Millie's Diner, along with about 30 other similar establishments across 3 states, was recently acquired by my company, Harrison Hospitality Group. He stated, his tone matter of fact. It's a new venture for us. We're primarily in the hotel business. I've been less than impressed with the initial reports on customer service and employee morale in many of these diners. Numbers on a spreadsheet rarely tell the whole story. Emily listened, absorbing this information. So the rumors were true. I decided to see for myself, Harrison continued, unannounced. In a less conspicuous guise, what I witnessed at Millie's this morning, your interaction with me, and subsequently your manager's reaction to it, was illuminating. So you're like that TV show? Undercover boss Emily asked, a hint of incredulity in her voice. He chuckled, a surprisingly warm sound. Something like that, yes. A bit more impromptu, perhaps. I believe in seeing the reality on the ground, not just filtered reports. What I saw in you, Ms. Carter, was a genuine instinct for compassion and service, something I believe is the cornerstone of true hospitality, something that seems to be sorely lacking in many of our new acquisitions. Emily felt a blush creep up her neck. I just thought you looked like you needed a bit of help, and you acted on it, despite the potential risk to your job, Harrison affirmed. That's a rare quality. My company is facing a challenge. We've acquired these businesses, many of them beloved local institutions, but they're struggling. And I believe a significant part of that struggle is a loss of the human touch, replaced by a rigid adherence to policies that often stifle common sense and decency. Managers like Sharon, while perhaps efficient in a narrow sense, are, in my view, detrimental to the long-term health of a service-based business. He paused, looking at her intently. Ms. Carter, I didn't come here just to apologize for your unfair dismissal, though I'm truly sorry for that. I came to offer you a proposition. Emily's eyebrows shot up. A proposition? Yes. I need someone with your inherent understanding of empathetic service. Someone who isn't afraid to prioritize people. I'm creating a small internal task force to visit our newly acquired diners, to observe, to identify issues, and to help retrain staff and management in how to be more like you, frankly. Emily was speechless. Her waitress with no college degree fired for giving away a bagel to retrain staff for a large hospitality group. It sounded preposterous. I know this is sudden, Harrison said, sensing her shock. You have no formal qualifications for such a role, according to traditional metrics. But I've learned that empathy and integrity aren't taught in business school. You have those in abundance. I want you to work with me, Emily. Initially, perhaps you could visit a few locations with me or with a consultant I'm bringing in. Share your observations, your instincts. Your salary would be significantly more than you were earning at Millie's, and naturally your previous employment record there will be amended. The first major complication was Emily's own self-doubt. Mr. Harrison, I wouldn't even know where to start. I'm just a waitress. You started this morning, Emily, by showing compassion to a stranger. He replied gently, That's the foundation. We can build the rest. I'm not asking you to become a corporate executive overnight. I'm asking you to share your perspective, your humanity. Will you at least consider it? Another obstacle was the sheer audacity of it. What would people think? What would Sharon think if she ever found out? But then a stronger thought pushed through. What if she could actually make a difference? What if her small act of kindness hadn't been a mistake, but a catalyst? Can I think about it? She asked, her mind a whirlwind. Of course, Harrison said, pulling a card from his wallet. My direct line. Call me by tomorrow evening. And in the meantime, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for the distress and inconvenience caused by your unjust dismissal this morning. Regardless of your decision about my offer, this is yours." Emily hesitated, then took the envelope. It felt thick. "One more thing," Harrison said as he stood to leave. "Your former manager, Sharon, will be reassigned. Her approach is not aligned with the values Harrison Hospitality intends to cultivate." Emily watched him walk back to his car. Her world tilted on its axis. From fired and desperate to a job offer from the owner of the company, all in a matter of hours. She opened the envelope. Inside were 10 crisp $100 bills. $1,000. More money than she'd seen in one place in a very long time. The stakes were suddenly dizzyingly high. Her initial goal of just finding another waitressing job seemed to evaporate, replaced by a far more complex and daunting possibility. She had a choice to make, a choice that could change her life and perhaps the lives of many others. The first step was simply believing she could even consider it. The next few weeks were a blur for Emily. After a sleepless night, wrestling with disbelief and a burgeoning sense of terrified excitement, she called Arthur Harrison, and her voice trembling slightly, accepted his offer. Her first official act was to accompany him not as an employee yet, but as an observational consultant to 2 other diners in nearby towns. One, the Corner Booth in a bustling suburban strip mall, and another, Highway Haven, a truck stop diner off a major interstate. Harrison was a surprisingly easy companion, treating her not as an underling, but as a valued colleague whose insights he genuinely sought. At the Corner Booth, Emily noticed the staff seemed harried and impersonal, rushing through orders with forced smiles. The manager, a slick young man named Kyle, spent most of his time on his phone in the back office, emerging only to bark orders or to schmooze with what he clearly considered important customers. When an elderly woman accidentally spilled her water, the waitress sighed audibly and slapped a rag down on the table with ill-concealed impatience. Emily winced, catching Harrison's eye. He simply nodded, a small notebook already in his hand. At Highway Haven, the atmosphere was different again. It was grittier, louder, but the staff, mostly older women who had worked there for years, had a no-nonsense warmth. They bantered with the truckers, knew their regulars by name, and handled the constant rush with a gruff efficiency that nonetheless felt welcoming. However, Emily also saw the worn-out equipment, the stained upholstery, and overheard a conversation between 2 waitresses about their paychecks being late again. After each visit, Harrison would ask for her impressions. "What did you see, Emily?" Not just the obvious, but the nuances. Initially, she was hesitant, intimidated by his corporate background. Well, at the Corner Booth, no one seemed very happy. She'd start then gaining confidence. As he listened intently, it felt like they were just going through the motions. That waitress, when the lady spilled her water, it wasn't just that she was annoyed, it was like the customer was an inconvenience, not the reason she was there. Regarding Highway Haven, she said, "They're trying hard, they really care, but it feels like the company isn't supporting them. If they're worried about their pay, how can they focus on giving their best?" Harrison absorbed her feedback, often comparing it to the dry, data-driven reports he received from regional managers. "You see things they don't, Emily," he said during one debrief. "You see the human cost, the missed opportunities for genuine connection." He then introduced her to Sarah Chin, a seasoned HR consultant he'd brought in to help structure the new initiative. Sarah was sharp, energetic, and initially a little skeptical of Emily's unorthodox hiring. "So, you're Mr. Harrison's empathy expert?" Sarah had asked, a slight edge to her voice during their first meeting in a temporary office space Harrison had set up. Emily flushed. I was a waitress. I know what it's like on the floor." But as Emily shared her observations, her simple, honest accounts of good and bad service, Sarah began to see her value. "Okay," Sarah conceded, after Emily detailed a particularly insightful observation about body language and tone of voice. "You've got the raw material. My job is to help you shape it into something teachable, scalable." The turning point, the moment that shifted Emily's role from reactive observer to something more proactive and solidified her commitment, came during a regional managers' meeting Harrison insisted Emily attend. It was held in a sterile conference room at a Harrison hotel. About a dozen regional managers, mostly men in ill-fitting suits, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, were gathered. Harrison introduced Emily briefly as someone offering a fresh perspective on customer engagement. The main agenda item was improving key performance indicators in Q4. Mark Thorne, the Central Midwest Regional Manager, a man whose demeanor radiated smug self-importance, was giving a presentation filled with charts and graphs, boasting about reduced labor costs, achieved by cutting hours and not replacing staff who quit, and increased table turnover, achieved by pressuring servers to rush customers. "As you can see," Thorne said, pointing to a particularly aggressive upward trend line, "my region is leading the pack in efficiency. We're streamlining operations, minimizing dwell time, and maximizing profit per square foot." Harrison interjected calmly, "And what about customer satisfaction scores, Mark, or employee retention rates?" Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "Slightly down, Arthur, but that's to be expected during a transition period. Short-term pain for long-term gain. Customers will adapt. Staff are replaceable if they can't meet the new pace." Then an anecdote was shared, almost as a joke by another manager, about how a server in Thorne's region had been disciplined for spending too much time consoling a customer who had received bad news on her phone while at the diner. Thorne chuckled. "Exactly. Time is money. We're not running therapy clinics." Before she even realized what she was doing, Emily spoke up. Her voice was quiet, but clear in the suddenly silent room. "But isn't that what a diner should be sometimes? A place where people feel cared for, even for a moment." Thorne stared at her as if she'd sprouted a second head. "And who are you, sweetheart?" Harrison cut in before Emily had to answer. "This is Ms. Carter Mark. She has extensive first-hand experience in customer-facing roles within our diners." Emily, emboldened by Harrison's support, continued her gaze fixed on Thorne. That customer who was upset, maybe she would have come back every week for years if someone had just shown a little kindness. Maybe she would have told her friends. Isn't that also a key performance indicator in the long run? Loyalty, word of mouth. Thorne scoffed. "That's sentimental nonsense. This is a business, not a tea party." "Perhaps it can be both." Emily countered her earlier nervousness, replaced by a firm conviction. "Perhaps being a good business means being a good human being first." The room was thick with tension. Several managers looked uncomfortable. Harrison watched the exchange with a neutral expression, but Emily could see a flicker of something, approval, in his eyes. Thorne, however, was clearly furious at being challenged, especially by a former waitress. After the meeting, Harrison walked with Emily to her car. "You were very brave in there, Emily. I couldn't let him say that," she said, still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. "It's just wrong." "I agree," Harrison said. "And you, Ms. Carter, have just shown me you're not just an observer. You're a voice, and that voice needs to be heard. The question is, are you ready to help me amplify it?" Looking at him, at the genuine belief in his eyes, Emily knew there was no going back. This wasn't just about visiting diners anymore. This was about challenging a mindset, about trying to instill something vital that had been lost. Her initial vague goal of helping Mr. Harrison crystallized into a fierce determination. She was going to help him change this company, one act of empathy at a time. The path ahead was daunting, filled with people like Thorne, but for the first time in a long time, Emily felt a profound sense of purpose. The confrontation with Mark Thorne at the regional meeting had been a baptism by fire. In its aftermath, Emily felt a strange mix of exhilaration and trepidation. She had found her voice, but in doing so had also painted a target on her back. Thorne, predictably, was incensed. Whispers reached Emily via Sarah Chen that Thorne was dismissively referring to her as Harrison's little pet project and the coffee girl who thinks she knows business. He made subtle attempts to undermine her credibility, questioning her lack of formal qualifications in memos and sidebar conversations with other managers. Harrison, however, remained steadfast in his support. "Don't let him rattle you, Emily," he advised. "His resistance is precisely why your perspective is so necessary." He provided her with a small office at the Harrison Hospitality Group's regional headquarters, access to company data with Sarah to help her interpret it, and a modest budget to begin developing her ideas. Emily knew she couldn't rely solely on intuition and anecdotes, especially if she was to counter the data-driven arguments of managers like Thorne. She dove into research, spending hours at the library and online learning about successful customer service models, employee engagement strategies, and the psychology of workplace culture. She devoured books on leadership communication and even basic business finance. It was like being back in school, but with a far more urgent and personal motivation. She found herself scribbling notes late into the night, her small apartment transformed into a command center for her burgeoning mission. She started by reaching out to some of the staff she'd met during her initial diner visits, particularly those at Highway Haven, who had shown that innate, if rough around the edges, warmth. She spoke to Flo, a veteran waitress with 20 years under her belt at the truck stop. "Flo," Emily asked one afternoon over coffee, "what's the one thing that would make your job better, that would help you serve your customers even better?" Flo didn't hesitate, feeling like someone actually listens to us, and knowing we've got what we need to do our job right. Hard to smile when the coffee machines broke for the third time this month and payroll's late again. These conversations were invaluable, providing raw, honest insights that no corporate report could capture. Emily began to formulate a plan not for a top-down, one-size-fits-all training mandate, but for something more organic, more empowering. Her idea was to create a Diner Champions program, identifying employees like Flo in each location who already embodied the empathetic ethos, and then training and empowering them to mentor their colleagues and drive change from within. Sarah Chen initially focused on traditional HR structures, was gradually won over by Emily's approach. "It's unconventional," Sarah admitted, reviewing Emily's proposal, "but it's people-centric. And frankly, after Thorne's display, I'm convinced a standard corporate rollout would be dead on arrival in his region." Sarah helped Emily refine the proposal, adding metrics to measure success. Not just customer satisfaction scores, but also employee turnover rates, positive online reviews, and even tracking repeat business. The new plan was ambitious. It involved 1. Identifying potential champions. Visiting more diners this time, specifically looking for staff who showed natural empathy and leadership potential. 2. Developing a workshop curriculum. Not just rules and scripts, but modules on active listening, conflict, de-escalation, understanding customer needs, even unspoken ones, and fostering a supportive team environment. Emily wanted to use real-life scenarios, many drawn from her own experiences and her conversations with staff. 3. Pilot program, rolling out the Diner Champions program in a few carefully selected locations. 1 in a neutral territory, 1 in a region with a more supportive manager, and daringly 1 within Mark Thorne's domain, specifically Millie's Diner, her old workplace. Harrison had, as promised, addressed the situation with Sharon, moving her to an administrative role away from customer interaction and installing a new, more open-minded manager who was willing to give Emily's ideas a chance. The personal stakes for Emily were immense. She was no longer just an observer. She was now an architect of change. Her name was attached to this initiative. If it failed, it wouldn't just be a setback for Harrison. It would be a public validation of Thorne's criticisms and a deep personal blow to Emily's newfound confidence. She found herself working longer hours than she ever had at Millie's, driven by a potent mix of fear and hope. There were days when the sheer scale of the task felt overwhelming, when the memory of Thorne's sneering face made her doubt herself. During one such moment, she found herself driving past Millie's. She saw Mrs. Henderson sitting alone at her usual table, looking a little lost. That image, the memory of countless small interactions, refueled her resolve. This wasn't just about corporate strategy. It was about people like Mrs. Henderson. It was about making these diners places of genuine warmth and connection again. With a deep breath, she turned her car around and headed back to her office, her new plan clutched firmly in her hand. The rollout of the Diner Champions pilot program began with a quiet intensity. Emily, alongside Sarah Chen, personally conducted the initial workshops at the 3 selected diners. She was nervous addressing groups of her former peers, but her genuine passion and first-hand experience resonated. She didn't talk down to them. She shared stories, asked for their input, and treated them as the experts they were in their own environments. At Millie's, her old diner, it was particularly poignant. Some of her former colleagues were skeptical at first, but when Emily spoke honestly about her own firing and her belief in their ability to make Millie's better, she began to win them over. A young cook named Javier, who Emily remembered as creative but often stifled by Sharon's rigid rules, became an early enthusiastic champion. The challenges, however, were immediate and multifaceted. In Mark Thorne's territory, the manager of the chosen diner, not Millie's, but another one called the Sunny Spoon, was outwardly compliant but subtly resistant. Resources Emily requested were slow to arrive. Schedules for champion meetings were constantly conflicted, and Thorne himself made a point of visiting the Sunny Spoon for an inspection right in the middle of one of Emily's workshops, his presence casting a chilling effect. He'd stand at the back, arms crossed occasionally, interjecting with pointed questions about ROI and measurable outcomes, clearly trying to intimidate the staff and undermine Emily. At another pilot location, the Family Skillet, an older, more cynical group of servers initially dismissed the workshops as corporate fluff. "Honey, I've been doing this for 30 years, one veteran waitress told Emily. "You think a few feel-good posters are going to change anything?" It took weeks of patient engagement of Emily consistently showing up, listening to their grievances, and demonstrating how empathetic service could actually make their difficult jobs easier and more rewarding, even leading to better tips, before she started to see a thaw. A significant crisis erupted when a scathing online review for the Sunny Spoon went viral locally. It detailed a disastrous dining experience, citing cold food, a rude server, and an indifferent manager. Thorne immediately pounced, forwarding the review to Harrison and other executives with a memo titled "Concerns Regarding New Training Initiatives and Declining Standards." He insinuated that Emily's soft approach was taking focus away from basic operational efficiency. The pressure on Emily and Harrison mounted. Some executives who had been cautiously optimistic about the empathy initiative began to waver. Harrison, though outwardly calm, confided in Emily that the board was asking pointed questions. This was Emily's dark night of the soul. She lay awake at night, the critical review and Thorne's smug face swimming in her vision. Had she been naive? Was she really equipped to handle this level of corporate politics and resistance? The memory of her simple, predictable life at Millie's, even with its frustrations, felt like a lost paradise. She even drafted a resignation letter. One particularly bleak evening, tears blurring the words. What pulled her back was a surprise visit from Flo, the veteran waitress from Highway Haven, which wasn't an official pilot, but a place Emily kept in touch with. Flo had heard about the bad review and Thorne's attacks through the diner grapevine. She showed up at Emily's small office with a container of her famous chili and a dose of tough love. "Heard you were thinking of quitting," Flo said, her gaze direct. "Don't you dare let that stuffed shirt win. What you're doing matters, Emily. For the first time in years, some of us feel like the company actually sees us as people, not just cogs in a machine." Flo then showed Emily a handful of handwritten notes from truckers thanking the Highway Haven staff for their kindness and good service. "This is what you're fighting for," Flo said, tapping the notes. Flo's visit was a lifeline. Emily tore up the resignation letter. She realized Thorne's attack was an act of desperation, a sign that perhaps her ideas were a threat to his outdated methods. She decided to fight back, not with anger, but with results. She focused her energy on Millie's and the Family Skillet, working closely with Javier and the slowly converting skeptics. She helped them implement small, visible changes, a customer compliment board, regular team huddles to share successes and challenges, and even simple things like ensuring the coffee was always fresh and the restrooms impeccably clean. She encouraged them to take ownership, to come up with their own ideas for improving service. Slowly, painstakingly, the tide began to turn. Customer compliment cards started to fill the board at Millie's. Online reviews for the Family Skillet began to mention the friendly staff and pleasant atmosphere. Employee absenteeism dropped slightly at both locations. Emily, with Sarah's help, meticulously documented everything. The positive feedback, the small upticks in sales, the anecdotal evidence of improved morale. She was gathering her ammunition, preparing for the inevitable showdown. The final test would be proving unequivocally that empathy wasn't just a nice idea, but a sound business strategy. And she knew that showdown would likely involve a direct confrontation with Mark Thorne, with the future of the entire initiative hanging in the balance. Climax. The air in the Harrison Hospitality Group's main boardroom was thick with unspoken tension. Arthur Harrison sat at the head of the large mahogany table flanked by several stern-faced board members. Mark Thorne was positioned strategically, a smug half-smile playing on his lips. Sarah Chin gave Emily an encouraging nod as they took their seats. This was it, the review of the Diner Champions pilot program. Thorne spoke first, presenting a barrage of spreadsheets that highlighted the still struggling numbers at the Sunny Spoon, conveniently omitting any mention of his own interference. He painted Emily's initiative as a costly distraction, a feel-good experiment with no tangible returns. While Ms. Carter's intentions may be noble, he concluded, his voice dripping with condescension, "We are running a business, not a social club. We need proven strategies, not idealistic whims." Then it was Emily's turn. She felt a tremor of nerves, but Flo's chili and the hopeful faces of the Diner Champions at Millie's and the family skillet flashed in her mind. She took a deep breath and began not with spreadsheets, but with a story. The story of Mrs. Henderson and how a small kindness could create a loyal customer. She then presented her findings, the dramatic increase in positive customer reviews for Millie's and the family skillet, the photos of their compliment boards overflowing the testimonials from staff about renewed pride in their work, and the modest but measurable uptick in repeat customers and per-customer spending at those locations. She even had a short video clip of Javier, the young cook from Millie's, passionately describing how the program had unlocked his creativity and made him excited to come to work. "Mr. Thorne is correct that we are running a business," Emily said, her voice steady and clear, looking directly at the board members. "But the most successful, sustainable businesses are built on strong relationships with customers and with employees. What we've seen in these pilot locations is that when you invest in your people, when you empower them to bring their whole selves, including their empathy to work, it doesn't just improve morale. It improves service, it builds loyalty, and yes, it positively impacts the bottom line." She then addressed the Sunny Spoon. "The results at the Sunny Spoon have been disappointing, I admit. However, I also have documented instances of managerial resistance and a lack of support for the champions there, which directly impacted the program's implementation." She didn't name Thorne directly, but laid out a factual timeline of obstructed efforts. Thorne sputtered, "This is an outrageous accusation. She's clearly deflecting from her own failures." Arthur Harrison finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Mark Y, too, have received reports regarding the difficulties Ms. Carter's team faced at the Sunny Spoon. In fact," he paused, letting his words sink in, "I have in my possession communications from you that actively discouraged cooperation with this pilot." Thorne's smugness vanished, replaced by a flush of anger. "This is a pre-approved company initiative. I was ensuring standards." "My standard," Harrison said, his eyes steely, "is for this company to be one that values both its customers and its employees. Miss, Carter's work, where it has been allowed to flourish, has demonstrated a clear path toward that standard. Her results at Millie's and the family skillet speak for themselves. He looked around the table. I believe it's time we expanded this initiative. The board members, swayed by Harrison's conviction and Emily's compelling human-centered data, murmured their assent. Mark Thorne sat in stunned, furious silence. The battle was won. Climax, 590 words, resolution. In the weeks that followed the boardroom showdown, a seismic shift occurred within Harrison Hospitality Group. Mark Thorne was quietly reassigned to a nebulous role with no direct reports effectively sidelining him. The Diner Champions program, under Emily's leadership and with Sarah Chen's structural support, received full funding and a mandate for a phased rollout across all newly acquired diners. Emily found herself with a proper office, a small team, and a title that still made her blink when she saw it on her new business cards: Director of Employee Engagement and Customer Experience. She traveled extensively overseeing the implementation of the program. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There was resistant skepticism and the inevitable challenges of changing an ingrained culture. But Emily, armed with her initial successes and Harrison's unwavering backing, persevered. She made sure to visit Millie's diner frequently. It had become the shining example of the program's potential. Javier was now the assistant manager, and the diner buzzed with a newfound energy and warmth. Mrs. Henderson still had her single pancake, but now the servers knew her crossword preferences and always had a kind word. Emily's life had transformed. She was no longer living paycheck to paycheck. She had paid off her mother's most pressing medical bills and was even saving a little. More importantly, she had found a profound sense of purpose. She hadn't gone back to school for social work, but in a way, her work was a form of it, fostering connection, empowering individuals, and improving the daily lives of hundreds of employees and thousands of customers. About a year after that fateful Tuesday, Emily found herself having lunch with Arthur Harrison at Millie's. The diner was bustling the staff, smiling, the aroma of good food and fresh coffee filling the air. "You did it, Emily," Harrison said, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "You helped us find our heart again." Emily smiled. "We did it. It was always there, just buried a little." As they ate, she noticed a new waitress patiently helping an elderly man who seemed confused about the menu. The waitress spoke to him with gentle respect, guiding him through his choices, much like Emily had done for Harrison what felt like a lifetime ago. The man, once settled with his order, looked up at the waitress with a grateful smile. Emily watched a lump in her throat. It wasn't just about policies and training programs anymore. It was about a culture, a way of being. And it was working. The legacy of a single free bagel had spread far beyond what she could have ever imagined.